This is a brief introduction to derivatives. I discuss their main characteristics, followed by an overview of the two categories of derivative, and end with a simple example of the obligations and cash flows involved in a forward contract. A derivative, as its name suggests, derives its value from something else, which is called an underlying. This is a variable that could be a financial asset, for example, a share or a bond, or a commodity, such as wheat, gold, or oil, a notional asset, for example, a share index or an interest rate, or an event, such as a credit default. Next, in the characteristics of a derivative, there must be a substantial delay between the beginning and the end of the contract. In this context, a substantial period does not necessarily have to mean months or years. Instead, it should just be long enough to separate it from the settlement practices in the spot or cash markets, where there might be, for example, 2, 3, or even 5 days between trading date and settlement date. For derivatives in commodities, the requirement that there should be a contract period with reasonable length means that the underlying should be able to be stored. If the underlying is perishable, this does not mean that you can't have a derivative, but in such cases the costs of storage can be high, with knock-on effects on the price and value of the derivative. Finally, derivatives are characterized by leverage, which means that there is a small initial investment required compared to the spot market for the underlying. In fact, it is the case that sometimes the initial investment is zero. There are two main categories of derivative. Firstly, there are forward commitments, comprising forwards, futures, and swaps. These are symmetrical instruments in the sense that the two parties on either side of the derivative contract have equal but opposite obligations according to the terms of the contract. In general, one party to the contract is obliged to buy something and the other is obliged to sell that same item. Secondly, there are contingent claims, which have only one derivative type, being the option. These are asymmetrical. On one side of the option, there is someone who has the right but not the obligation to take an action according to the terms of the contract. On the other side, the contracting party has an obligation to take a specified action if the other person chooses to exercise the option. If the option is not exercised, nothing happens. Let's now consider an example of a simple derivative being a forward. This can be represented by the contract shown in the red square. In this case, there is an obligation to trade or exchange one share for 110 Rand on a specified date, which is exactly 1 year away from today. Therefore, the underlying is that one share. The forward price is 110 Rand, and the expiration date is 1 year from today's date. Two derivatives traders agree to this contract. A agrees to the obligation to buy the share for 110 Rand on expiration date, and B agrees to sell the share for that price on that date. On the date of entering into the forward contract, T0, there is no cash flow between A and B. At inception date, in other words, the value of the contract is zero. This is not a coincidence. As part of your studies of derivatives, you will see that a forward contract is priced in a manner such that it has no value at the point at which it is created. In this example, the 110 Rand trading price for the share in 1 year's time is not a number that is pulled out of thin air. Instead, it is a calculated amount based on the necessary input data. At expiration date, things are very different. The contract will very likely have value at this stage. To illustrate, consider trader A's situation if the spot share price, as listed on the JSE, at expiration date happens to be 150 Rand. A has the obligation to buy the share under the forward contract for 110 Rand, and therefore does exactly that. straight away A could then sell the share on the JSE for 150 Rand, making a gain of 40 Rand. In fact, you will see later on that A does not have to sell the share in order to obtain the profit of 40 Rand. Even more mysteriously perhaps, A does not necessarily even have to buy the share from B and will still get a 40 Rand gain. Looking at the contract from B's point of view, the situation is not so happy. Even though the spot price is 150 Rand and B could sell the share on the JSE for that amount, this outcome is prevented because B is obliged to sell the share to A for only 110 Rand. The loss for B, therefore, is 40 Rand, equal in size to the profit for A.